So the other crazy detail is that when he went to prison, he allegedly offered Christopher Tarbell of the FBI Cybercrime Division, he offered him a bunch of money to let him go right after he was arrested. But basically, if Ross was offering money to Chris Tarbell, and we don't know what happened to his other laptop, then there's kind of this other angle that always sat in the back of my head with his pardon, and that's if he gets out of prison, all the money that's associated with the crimes of Silk Road can now be spent. Now, I think they are auctioning off the other stuff. Yeah, so if there was money, like, that's why I was like, keep an eye on any of the Bitcoin from that era if it starts to move now.
Yeah.
Because
this guy could have fucking billions.
Just recently, I was lucky enough to talk to Barely Sociable, the investigative journalist YouTuber who has one of the biggest videos talking about the Silk Road on YouTube. In that video, he demystifies the case of Ross Ulbricht, aka the owner, creator, mastermind behind the Silk Road, the first big-time dark market to accept Bitcoin as payment. And he very clearly proves in that original video that while certainly a victim of government politics, he is far, far, far from innocent. Now, 5 years later, we're gonna get to hear his unfiltered thoughts about Ross's recent pardon. Hope you enjoy.
Another official Gokanaru interview. Let's get it. Yo, can you hear me?
Hey, dude. How's it going?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I really appreciate you on such short notice hopping in to talk about this, man. But I could tell on Twitter that you were following the case and that you had opinions on it. And so I was curious because I will not lie. The video that you made on the Silk Road is a legendary video on YouTube, in my opinion. You have numerous videos that I consider legendary.
Yeah, dude. It's that case. It's weird. I feel like if I uploaded the same thing today, it wouldn't have definitely. Like 5 years go by, and I've gone through every file on Ross's computer, like all the publicly available evidence, and like there's still more. There's like a lot more to the story. Not that it like changes any of my original thoughts, if that makes sense, but it really, like, the more you kind of dig through the files, the more you realize like the propaganda is just like a means to an end with this case. Like, like not only does he like order hits and you can trace it to the Bitcoin transaction.
Yeah, the ledger.
In his journal, he literally is like, "Oh, I'm getting blackmailed." Then the next day, he's like, "I'm gonna kill this guy." He's like, "Oh, I got word they died." And he literally snitched on himself. And a lot of people, the craziest thing that I've come across since that video is that basically all the evidence that was used to convict him on his laptop, because, you know, he actually had a second laptop. I didn't know about that until I would say like 3 years later when I'm going through the files, that basically the computer that he's running it on, the fact that he saves all these Tor chats, there's actually a lot of stuff that's still missing, if that makes sense. Particularly from like the early days, if that makes sense. But nothing was ever, like, everything that's in that journal, having gone through it, it's all consistent with, like, I've gone through all the Silk Road archives that you can still go through on the forums and stuff. Yeah. It's all consistent. So, like, the idea that he ever would have been framed for any of this stuff, or that there was any tampering with the laptop data, no evidence of that. But the crazy thing that has come up is that there is some evidence to suggest that there's such poor documentation on this case. Like, despite it being like one of the most popular ones, there's super poor documentation on like how would I best describe this? It's like YouTube has like all of these sub stories and like internet sagas from like lol cows, or just like stuff that people have documented. The Silk Road was basically just like a platform for criminal activity, and there's like so many different side stories. Like, in one instance, and we don't have like the answers to a lot of them, like Ross was also trying to track down another moderator of his named DA, or Digital Alchemy. Then we also know that there's also an I screwed that up in the video. I said FBI did the other hit. It was actually HSI Baltimore.
Okay. HSI Baltimore? Like so it was, wait up. So that's just like an investigative organization in Baltimore? Is that what it is?
So there's actually 3 separate investigations that are concurrent to the Silk Road. One of them is out of Baltimore, and that one's like Operation Marco Polo. That's like originally designed to take down the Silk Road, like by lawmakers, right? And so Baltimore is where you get the Curtis Green hit, where he orders a hit on his employee. But then that one's fake and set up by Karl Mark Force. And then there's also HSI Chicago. And then there's also the FBI Cybercrime Division, which is basically the case out of New York that he was actually charged for. And so the FBI is the one that locates the servers. HSI Chicago was critical in getting the laptop, basically.
Right.
So they all...
Sorry, the FBI, the servers were in Iceland, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And
Sorry, go on.
I actually have a follow up to this where I'm going back through. There's one really, really, really juicy file that was found on Ross's computer. That it's basically like, it's probably going to be an hour plus deep dive, but it's something I want to dive into. But my point, the crazy thing is that there's so many loose ends. Like there's so many like other storylines that you can follow. Like, for example, Smedley, the guy who coded the Silk Road, he was like the coder that was brought on by Variety Jones. He got doxxed. We know his real name, but he's never been arrested.
Damn.
For some really weird reason. Then there's other cases like Ross had a hedge, like a hedging system, for example, on the Silk Road, so you could like trade the Bitcoin and still get the value in case it fluctuated. And he did that on Mt. Gox. And at one point he gets hacked for like $500,000, and basically that money disappeared. It's probably worth God knows how much. We have no idea where that went. There's like all these other like threads that you can follow, like what happened to the second laptop, a bunch of interesting things. And I was really surprised when I've gone through the data. Number one, how much bullshit like at the end of the day, I'm indifferent to Ross being released, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I know like the morality of it, but then it also like the politics of the situation. Like nobody would have been sympathetic if he'd only received 20 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's because it was like such a, like this guy's going to die in prison. Like it made him seem like a martyr effectively. Like it was an injustice had occurred. Which I mean, yeah, like you pointed out, I think like the reality is that they were trying to kind of set a precedent, but you also pointed out that like the guys who were defending him, their defense didn't make that much sense. It seemed like they were going in with a hopeless case where they're pleading not guilty when there's so much evidence against him.
Yeah, there's got to be something weird with that. Maybe they didn't think that, like obviously whenever you have a federal case, the prosecutor is required to give you the evidence for you to go over and like what they're going to be charging you for.
Yeah.
And the crazy part of that is that as I've become more familiar with this, the DOJ, I think 90% of the cases with the DOJ, 90% they plead guilty. About like 8%, the cases are dismissed. And then the other some odd percent that go to trial, only 0.4% get acquitted. So when you're going against the government, like it's double insane that they recommended that. But the crazy part about this is that it was actually the right call. He probably ended up spending less time in prison by fighting it, and making this big fuss. But obviously hindsight's 2020. It looked like a terrible decision.
Yeah. I mean, it was a massive gamble if it was like they actually thought this was the path. You know what I mean? Like
there's one other angle that I've never. So I've talked to. So I'm familiar with this is something I want to voice because I think that I could be wrong here. But if he has another laptop. So the other crazy detail is that when he went to prison, he allegedly offered Christopher Tarbell of the FBI Cybercrime Division, he offered him a bunch of money to let him go right after he was arrested or something.
Understood. Right. Is that one of the FBI agents who got dinged for corruption because he basically stole some of the Bitcoin?
That was a DEA agent. So, and then the other one is a Secret Service member. Both the corruption is isolated, that the corruption that has been documented. If you go through the files in the Silk Road, there's actually more where they just never pursued it.
Understood.
But basically, if Ross was offering money to Chris Tarbell, and we don't know what happened to his other laptop, right? Right. Then there's kind of this other angle. It always sat in the back of my head with his pardon, and that's if he gets out of prison, all the money that's associated with the crimes of Silk Road can now be spent. I'm pretty sure.
Like access, do you mean?
Yeah, well, effectively, a presidential pardon, there's legal precedent where as long as they haven't sold the assets or something like that, that they actually can give it back with a presidential pardon. Now, I think they are auctioning off the other stuff. Yeah, so if there was money, like that's why I was like, keep an eye on any of the Bitcoin from that era if it starts to move now.
Yeah,
because
this guy could have fucking billions. I mean,
I don't think like it's hard to say that he had like a massive stash, but even a small one.
Bro, I was just running the calculation. I might be losing my mind, but like 1,600 Bitcoin is like $160 million or something like that.
Yeah. So they auctioned off the Bitcoin they got off his computer, right? It was like 144K.
Okay.
But then the government's been paid back for this because the Silk Road ended up getting hacked twice. And Ross hid these hacks from his users. Right. And I believe the grand total for how much the government ended up seizing. So in 2020, the guy who had hacked I think the Silk Road in like 2012 or something. There's 2 hacks in 2012. Both of those people sat on the Bitcoin on their Bitcoin for years. And the time at seizure was $4.36 billion. For,
Jesus Christ.
Both statues. Yeah. So on top of the money they got from Ross, and then the other part too, though, is that for someone like, if I recall off the top of my head, I could be wrong, Ross's right-hand man, Variety Jones, they never seized his money. With Smedley, like all these other characters, the amount of people that like, there's just a loose end there, right? Any of these loose ends could be worth like hundreds of millions of dollars if the government has their sights on them. And that's what's really crazy is I think if they're, like I said, I'm not a legal expert on this, but of the people I've discussed with, they made it sound like if there's a pardon, then that forgives everything. So
right.
Then you could spend the money. So I have no idea. Most of his mods got caught. But then like the same moderator who's responsible for like flipping, which her name is Scout, she was never, it's a girl actually, a female mod. She's a cat lady.
Damn.
Yeah, there's all these like weird characters if you like go through. It's really
like an ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little. Yeah, it's exactly. It's like a platform, and there's like all these little sub stories that kind of take place there. But yeah, probably more info than you bargained for.
No, dude, this is exactly what I wanted to hear, bro. You basically are probably one of the leading people in terms of being informed about the general fucking ecosystem that was going on at this time. I was going to ask, that was definitely one of the questions I was going to ask, was like, do you think Ross has access to like a disgusting amount of Bitcoin? And you're basically saying you don't know that, but like if he does, he might actually be able to act on it.
So you know that guy in the video who predicted Trump pardoning him all the way back in 2019?
Yeah.
The end of the video.
Yeah.
There's like the camp of Lynn Ulbricht, and she's been super active in all this. And I number one, I think that's crazy that guy predicted it because it was absurd in 2019 that he would be pardoned.
Yeah.
But then that guy knew before. I mean, it wasn't in motion from what I understand then, but like I've heard through the grapevine, like basically messages get back to me regarding this case. Number one, I know that Ross's family hates me, which understandably.
Dude, yeah, you did probably a lot of damage to the work they were doing, if that makes sense. The puff pieces are, you know what I mean? 12 million people, bro. That's a lot of negative press.
Yeah, and it's not like I ever intended for that to be as
no. I think your video is pretty measured as well. Like it's just kind of in my head. It's just like looking at the reality. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. And the reality is messy. There's no good people in that story.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The government was a dick, and then the other side of it too. It was, and I think there's kind of this gray area where like the same guys that were supposed to be taking him down, they realized halfway through the investigation, they're like, wait a minute, we can make more money if we just keep this thing going. So I think the same corrupt federal agent that does the hit on his employee, he later logs in with a different account and he attempts to sell Ross active information on like this meeting that's about to take place with Mt. Gox. So he was like trying to save Ross towards the end of it. While that meeting didn't end up taking place, he heard about it through the other divisions. So he like intercepts him and he sells him. He was going to provide the name that Mark Karpelès. That's the other thing I didn't realize too. Why did Ross have this hard on for Mark Karpelès at the trial? It's because there's some weird stuff going on with.
I'm just going to give context real quick. Mark Karpelès is the CEO of Mt. Gox at that time, right? And that was the person that the Ross Ulbricht like activists basically pinned as being like the mastermind owner of the Silk Road. Just to explain for like the chat and for people who don't know the full content, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but it was basically the claim in the Ulbricht camp was that yes, Ross Ulbricht started the Silk Road, but he sold it, I think, in like 2011 or something like that, and then he bought it back in 2013 from the guy that you named there, who was the CEO of Mt. Gox, and then it was basically like pinned on Ross by the FBI. The whole story obviously is that the FBI at a cafe or something like that, they created a diversion and they needed to get access to his laptop unlocked, and so they created a diversion while Ross was working at a cafe, and they gained access to his unlocked laptop, which just had, as you said, like his journal and also like the dashboard that just showed he was Dread Private Roberts.
The other crazy thing too is he kept detailed accounting logs of everything.
Yeah.
And like, so even like when the money was like going out for the hits and stuff, where he was actually like, if you go through all of his accounting stuff, that's the reason I say it's so hard to pin down how much money he might actually have, because I attempted to like audit this like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
It ended up being way too much.
I see.
Incomplete information you have access to. It was the library he was at too as well.
Understood.
But yeah, Yeah, what was one other thing I was going to bring up?
Sorry, the CEO of Mount Gox, why he had a hard on, or sorry, why Ross had a hard on for him.
Yeah, so there's some weird angle that I can't really explain it too saliently, but basically Ross thinks at some point that some of the money that he has, like his hedging account, basically Ross actually gets his Mount Gox account hacked for like I think $500,000 or something. At one point, this is in late 2013, right before kind of this meeting takes place and when the U.S. government was going after Mount Gox. Now, I can't do all the specifics off the top of my head because it's a long story, but
you're good.
Yeah, basically, there's some weird angle where Ross thought that Mark Karpelès had stolen money from him. Basically, his account gets hacked, but then like when he goes to Mount Gox and he's like, my account's been hacked, Mount Gox tells him to go to law enforcement. And so he knows he can't go to law enforcement. So there's some really weird angle there where I guess he thinks that money was stolen by the DEA through Mount Gox, but that's not the case.
Okay.
Like I said, this is very convoluted. We don't know what actually happened to that money. But there's some other weird angle where Ross was upset with them because if Mark Karpelès was cooperating, I believe at one point he even tries to reach out to Mark. You can find this on the internet. There was some attempt at messaging Mark when he learns about this meeting that's supposed to take place. And I believe Mark like brushes him off or something like that. So there's some weird dynamic there that's not fully clear about why, but it was true that from HSI Chicago's perspective, they were planning on kind of narrowing down like Mark Karpelès' financial angle because like Bitcoin, the only use case for it back then was to buy drugs, right?
Yeah.
That he profited off of the Silk Road's growth. So I guess they figured he had some working relationship. But if Ross had this weird hedging system, it kind of insinuates there's something there. But as far as I'm aware, there is no legitimate connection. They're just two circumstantial players.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to this story. And like all I'll say is like every single person I've talked to one-on-one that's like a big name in this crypto space, they're all sketchy. Nobody's normal.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't want to make allegations that aren't based on reality that I have evidence for, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I definitely understand that. And yes, in my experience, it's pretty similar. Like, dude, when it comes to the crypto space, morality is, the very most, I would say it's a show. Like, the fascinating thing that I was kind of highlighting about the messages in your Silk Road video, the first one, was the obvious fact that these are complete like power games happening. You know what I mean? Like morality is so secondary to understanding the interests that each like element or each player has, right? Like obviously, you know, the morality on the side of even the law enforcement agencies and shit are questionable as well. You know, they're just kind of, they're players in this larger game that you know, have their own role that they're trying to fulfill.
Yeah, and I think what's scary, dude, is that with all the other markets that have come and gone, now they don't use Bitcoin. They use things like Monero.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is I've looked at all these like the publicly available data for other cases. The Silk Road is one of the few exceptions where there's all the data that's like publicly available that's come out.
Yeah, because encryption's gotten better, you mean? Yeah, sorry, go on.
But we just haven't had like there's no other case where you have like the guy who documented everything.
Like, I see.
Snitched on himself basically. But yeah, on top of that, there's so many, like if Ross didn't keep track of everything, it would have been so much harder to actually pin. Because on the other side with Carl Mark Force, the DEA agent working for HSI Baltimore, he when it comes to that story where he orders a hit on his employee, right? We're missing the first half of exposition on how he gained Ross's trust in the first place because the guy basically didn't archive any of his PGP messages or correspondence he had with Ross.
I see.
So like there's so many other bits and pieces that are missing either from like an expired PGP key. But I will say definitely there is one other corrupt agent that never been caught, but I'm already giving away too much.
Oh yeah, this is the exclusive scoop. This is the next bit that you're working on.
That's all I'll say for now.
That was in fact not all he would say for now, as me and Mr. Sociable would then go on to talk more about his juicy next video, as well as discuss the true identity of the creator of Bitcoin, and he would talk about the most danger that he has ever personally felt through covering his story. If you'd like to see that full interview, it is currently available on my Patreon. And yeah, if you like the hoodie that I was wearing during this, it's only available at gokamerch.com. Until next time, give your mother a hug.